This week's parsha, Parshos Matos, deals with the laws of Nidorim, Neder, vows. And it's interesting, Gemara, which tells us on the pasuk of Hashem Yisrach La. The case the Gemara tells us is based on the Chumash, that if a woman takes a vow, she takes a neder not to have ice cream, not to eat cake, and unbeknown to her, her husband annulled the vow, and she went ahead and ate the cake, had the cookies, had the ice cream. The Torah tells us Hashem Yisrach La, she needs forgiveness. There's some type of atonement. So the question, so we see, even though the bottom line is she didn't do anything wrong, but she had a machshava ra, a bad thought was enough, that Hashem Yisrach La. And it seems to go against the famous Gemara in Kiddushin, machshava ra eino mitztaref l'maisa. We have a concept in the Gemara, machshava tova, good thought, God does mitztaref l'maisa. But machshava ra eino mitztaref l'maisa. He doesn't connect it. So the question is, how do we reconcile? The Gemara in Kiddushin seems to say a machshava ra doesn't count for the maisa. Yet the Torah here tells us Hashem Yisrach La. This person needs forgiveness. So there are a couple of different approaches. Approach number one is, very simply put, is there's no contradiction. The Gemara says Eino Ra Mitztaref L'Maisa, bad thought does not count as an action. And the Torah tells us Hashem Yisrach La. So a machshava ra still needs atonement. Hashem Yisrach La. However, but it's not Mitztaref L'Maisa. That's what some want to say. Others suggest, based on a brisker Rav, that there's a concept we have by lo sachmod. There's a biblical prohibition, one of the 10 Commandments, not to covet someone else's property. And so the Rambam writes, to violate lo sachmod, the different levels of lo sachmod, but to violate the different levels of desire, but to violate lo sachmod, you have to actually do a maisa. You have to actually take the object that you are desired. If you just had the thought but you don't do it, it's not lo sachmod. It might be lo sisava, but it's not lo sachmod. So it says, the Rambam writes, you don't violate lo sachmod until you actually take the object. And then in the next breath, the Rambam writes, and there's no makis for lo sachmod. You don't get a good old-fashioned whooping. Why? Because it's a lav she'ein bo maisa. It doesn't involve an action. So the Ravid, yes, on the Rambam, I don't understand. You just contradicted yourself. You did finish saying that there's no. You did finish saying the only time you're liable for lo sachmod if you do an action, you actually take the object. And the next line you say, but it's a lav she'ein bo maisa, and therefore there's no makkah. So how do we reconcile? So this is Rav Eichik says, the brisker Rav. I think the Stipler points out as follows: that really lo sachmod is an isur shebalev. It's an isur in the heart. However, something in the heart, it's hard to know. We don't like to leave things in the heart, like the Gemara tells us by the mitzvah of chametz, of the mitzvah about Yirah by Yimatzah, that's the prohibition of not to own chametz. So the Torah tells us that in addition to not eating chametz, one is prohibited as well from owning chametz. So therefore, the Mepharshim point out, so the Gemara says, Bittul b'leiv sagi. In the Torah, all you need is bittul, is nullification. However, midrabanan, they said, rabbinically speaking, you should go ahead and do a bedika and destroy. So that's fine. However, the question is, the Beis Yosef asked, when do we make the bracha? Do we make the bracha on the bittul or the bedika? We make the bracha on the mitzvah midrabanan, and not the mitzvah min Torah of bittul. So how come we make the bracha on the rabbinic mitzvah, not the biblical mitzvah? So in that, the Beis Yosef answers, we don't make a bracha on something which is dvarim shebalev. Chazal only were choveya a bracha on something which is concrete, and therefore who knows what a person's kavanah is, and therefore we don't make a bracha on something which is balev. So anytime it's something balev, it's always hard to put your finger on. It's much easier to figure out a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, and a tzaddik. A Torah scholar, you give them a test, you speak to them in learning, but a tzaddik, who could judge the level of Sidkit? So either way, the Rambam writes, it's an Isser Shebalev. Really, it's an Isser in the heart. And that's why it's a Lav She'im Bo Ma'aseh. It's an Isser Machshava. But the Rambam writes, you're not chayiv until you actually take it. That's only a siman. That only shows, if you actually take the object, that shows that your desire in your heart has gone too far. But not that the Maisa is part of the mitzvah. Really, it's an issue of a wave. The action just shows that you've gone too far. So similarly here, how do we reconcile? It's true, the Gemara says in Kedusha, Machshava Ra, Eino Mitzdaref L'maisa. Machshava Ra, you're not punished on. However, when is that? I don't know if it's a pure Machshava, if it stays in the realm of Machshava. However, it's true, in this case, the woman ate the cheesecake, the chocolate chip cookies, the ice cream. It's true, at that point it was a Maisa Heter. It is true that at the time she did it, it was permitted, but nevertheless, the Maisa is associated with the Machshava. So anytime you have a Machshava alone, then you don't need atonement. But a Machshava Ra, together with a Maisa, even a Maisa Beheter, one does not require. One does Hashem Yisracha. That's the second approach. A third approach is from the Klei Chemda, one of the great Pilpul Svarim on Chumash. And he points out, he refers us to a Gemara. The Gemara tells us regarding fishing on Shabbos, the Gemara in Menachos. Someone fishes on Shabbos and is successful, you are liable for Seder, for trapping min ha-Torah. There's an Isser of Seder, trapping. So the Gemara talks about a case where a person's fishing on Shabbos, and lo and behold, he throws the net in to catch the fish, and what do you know, in addition to some fish coming up, a human being, a baby fell in, a little toddler fell in, and he saved the life of the child. So the question is this person labeled a Machalo Shabbos? Is this person labeled a desecrator of Shabbos? So the Gemara has a machokas, Rabba Rava. Do we go basar maisa or basar machshava? Do we go by the act? If we go by the act of what the person did, he did an act of hatzalas nefashos, of saving someone, so there's no punishment, there's no onish. However, if we go by the machshava, his intent was to machal Shabbos, or his intent was to fish, which entails chol Shabbos. So therefore, therefore it's a machokas in the Gemara. Whether you go basa maisa, basa machshava. Comes along the Klei Chemda and says, when do you have the machokas? between Rabba and Rava, when we go Basa Maisa, Basa Makshava, that's only in the realm of mitzvahs ben Adam lamakom, commandments between man and God. However, in the realm of ben Adam l'chavero, in the realm of interpersonal mitzvahs averas, we don't ever say Basa or Makshava. The only time you have a machlokas is the dispute in the Talmud when it comes to a mitzvah ben Adam lamakom. But when you're dealing with a mitzvah ben Adam l'chavero, we never go Basa Makshava. What's the pshat? That's how he explains. That's why, because what do we see according to the Kli Chemda? A tremendous yisod in mitzvahs ben Adam l'chavero, that they are result oriented. When it comes to Makshava, that's the realm of God. That's ben Adam l'makom. When it comes to people, helping out other people, if you don't help them out, so you're not doing any good. And even without intent, as Chazal tell us, if you drop a $50 bill, if a $50 bill falls out of your pocket and an ani, and a poor person picks it up, you fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah, even though you didn't even know you did it. Or as the Klei Chem and other Achronim explain of Shlomo Zalman, when we find the concept in the Gemara, mitzvah srichas kavana, we find it by shofar, we find it by lulav, we find it by matzah. Those are all mitzvahs ben Adam lamakom. Mitzvahs ben Adam l'chavero, we don't say mitzvah because it's not the kavanah that's important. Of course, it's good to have the bright kavanah also, but the ikar is that you help out the other individual, and therefore as well. That's how the Aaron Levine points out that we have the mitzvah of tefillin shel yad, tefillin shel rosh. And they represent the two different categories of commandments. Tefillin shel rosh represents commandments between man and God, and tefillin shel yad represents ben adam l'chavero, because rosh represents the head, the yad represents arm, action, results. So the Rav Aaron Levine, from the Drushva Ian, I think that's the name of the sefer, he points out that when it comes, if you notice, you never, how do we put on our tefillin in the morning? Tefillin shel yad, the arm, the head, we take off the head, then we take off the arm. So we're never left with only the tefillin shel rosh. We only have the tefillin shel rosh on our head when we have the tefillin shel yad. So what is the message, what is the lesson here? So he explains is because when it comes to mitzvahs ben adam l'makom, it's all about the makshava. And therefore God is very concerned about your makshava, mitzvah svichas kavana, and therefore so therefore it has to do with the head, but tefillin shel yad, that's the arm, that's the result of adam l'chavero. And he points out, we see that one has to ground themselves in mitzvahs but adam l'chavero, that one has to work on, in addition to keeping the regular mitzvahs, instead of taking on chumras on mitzvahs ben adam l'makom, nothing wrong with that, but he says you're better off starting off with chumras ben adam l'chavero, not to speak lashon hara. Not to speak lashon hara isn't a chumrah, but what I mean to say is there are certain times when it's permitted to speak lashon hara, and so in those times you shouldn't speak it. There are other times when Yikar Adin things are permitted. Once you work on the ben adam l'chavero, go out of the way to be nice to someone else, and therefore once you're grounded in the ben adam l'chavero, then you have the ben adam l'makom. So that's the pshat here. So when it comes to mitzvahs ben adam l'chavero, it's all about the bottom line. If you didn't cause them harm, like by the Orach Chaim writes by Mechiras Yosef, like Yosef says, "Atem chashavtem lo ra." You might have had bad intentions, but don't worry, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes care of us. Rabos machshavas leivich v'atzas Hashem yisakam. It's all in God's domain. So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh writes that that the brothers didn't need atonement because they didn't actually cause harm to Yosef. So when it comes to mitzvahs ben adam lechavero, if the bottom line, you don't cause harm, so you don't need atonement. However, when it comes to mitzvahs ben adam lemakom, it's all about the machshava, so then even a machshava ra would require an atonement. So we have three approaches to how we reconcile. On one hand, the Torah tells us Hashem Yisrach La, that God will regard that you need atonement for the neder, and yet the Gemara says in Kedusha Machshava Ra Ino Mitzaref L'Maisa. So we have three approaches. One is, you're right, it's not Mitzaref L'Maisa, but you still need atonement. Number two is a pure Machshava Ra alone, that doesn't require atonement. But the Machshava Ra associated with the Maisa, even if it's a Maisa Eter, you still require atonement. And the third approach is the Kli Chemda, that it's only when it comes to mitzvahs ben lemakom, so then Basa Machshava plays a role. So then you need an atonement of Machshava Ra. So neder Mashenke by Mechiris Yosef by mitzvahs ben lechavero, as long as you didn't cause any harm, so therefore one would not require atonement. This week's parasha, Parshas Masei, deals with the commandment, the mitzvah, to live in the land of Israel, to live in Eretz Yisrael, in Perek Lamed Gimel 33, Pasuk 53. Well, Rasha Mosel Yishavtem Bam, the Torah talks about the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, and in fact, based on this pasuk, based on this verse, the Ramban Nechmanidi concludes one has a biblical obligation. Every Jew has a biblical obligation to live in the land of Israel, and that is the opinion of the Ramban. On the other hand, we're familiar with the famous opinion of Rabbeinu Chaim HaKohen, who Tosas quotes in Kuf Yud Amid Beis, that Tosas writes during his day that the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael no longer applies. Why does it no longer apply? So it no longer applies either because of Sakanas Drachim, the danger it took for them to travel to Eretz Yisrael. It was dangerous, pirates, boats, the technology wasn't as good. It was a very dangerous travel, and many died on the way. Or a second reason given as well is that it was difficult to fulfill the mitzvahs hatchuyis ba'aretz. It was too difficult to fulfill the agricultural mitzvahs which are limited to the land of Israel, Shemitah, Tshuva, Ma'isa. And based on these two reasons, Sakanas Drachim and the mitzvahs hatuyis ba'aretz, Tosas concludes during his day that there was no mitzvah, I think around the 12th century, that there was no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. So it's a machlokas Ramban and the Bali Tosfos on whether Bizman Hazeh there is a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. In fact, there's a question asked, a famous tshuva of Ramosha Feinstein in the Igros Moshe. The yes Ramosha, during our day today, do we follow the Ramban who writes as a obligation for every Jew to live in Eretz Yisrael, or do we go with the Bali Tosfos that there's no longer an obligation? So Ramosha writes back, he thinks there's an in-between position. In fact, the Rambam, Maimonides, doesn't quote this halacha. So there's a whole discussion among the commentators, why did the Rambam leave it out? Why did the Rambam not count the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael? So we'll come back to that. But Ramosha wants to bring a raya from the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, Perek Hey Halacha Tes writes that it's usher to leave Eretz Yisrael, but he does not say that it's usher to live outside Eretz Yisrael. In other words, Rav Moshe writes, if there was an absolute obligation to live in Eretz Yisrael, so then the Rambam would have recorded a prohibition to live outside Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, according to the Rambam, there is no obligation to live in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, we also have to take into account Rabbeinu Chaim, and therefore, Rav Moshe comes up with a unique approach. That's what he calls a mitzvahs kiyumis, that there is no obligation to live in the land of Israel. You don't see any aver by not going. But if you live in the land of Israel, you fulfill a mitzvah min ha-Torah. What they call a mitzvah harishus, a mitzvah kiyumis. A classical example of a mitzvah kiyumis is brought down by the Vilna Gaon in Hilchas Chametz Matzah in the laws of Pesach, that we know the Torah tells us there are 7 days as a mitzvah to eat matzah. On the other hand, the Torah says be'erev tochu matzos. On the night of Pesach, Leil Pesach, you have an obligation to eat matzah. So which one is it? So there are many answers, but the Vilna Gaon points out, so the Gemara seems to say, the 7 days you have a rishus, the first night's a chiyuv. So the Vilna Gaon says is, so the first night everyone agrees to get a mitzvah. What happens if you do it, if you eat matzah day 3, day 4? So he says you get a mitzvah in our Torah, there's no chiyuv, kind of like a discussion in the Tziv writes, why perhaps every kisai you eat the night of Pesach, you get a fulfillment of the mitzvah. The chiyuv is only 1 or 2, but everyone you have there's a kiyum. So that's the concept the Vilna Gaon has, and it's discussed also by the laws of tzitzis. That tzitzis, the obligations, if one is wearing a 4-corner garment, one is obligated to put on tzitzis. But if you're not wearing a 4-corner garment, technically speaking, you're exempt. So the Gemara in Sota talks about Moshe was a mitzvah to enter the land of Israel. So the question is, what was he mitzvah about? So the Gemara says, to fulfill the mitzvahs hatchuyis ba'aretz, to fulfill the mitzvahs which are dependent on the land. So the question, why is he so excited about it? He's not living there, so what is he worrying about? But then we see that Moshe wanted to put himself in a situation where one can fulfill as many mitzvahs as possible. And therefore, that's why he is a mitzvah. And that's what they say, that should be our attitude. We should emulate Moshe Rabbeinu and try to put ourselves in a situation to fulfill all the mitzvahs we can. So too with tzitzis, and so too with Eretz Yisrael. And that's what they say, that was Pesach Sheni's all about. What were they all worried about? Okay, they were exempt from the mitzvah. Why get all worked up about it? And the answer is no, we all have to be like Pesach Sheni Jews, that if we can't do it, we should strive to be in a position where we can make it up. So either way, that's Rav Moshe's opinion, that one is a mitzvah kiyumis today, not a mitzvah kiyuvis. On the other hand, and it's interesting to note that Rav Moshe, I think, who wrote this tshuva in 1952, I believe, did not mention, didn't seem to make a distinction of the fact that we have a state of Israel today. In contrast, we have other poskim, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, who says that now with the establishment of Medinas Israel, he claims that the mitzvah of living in Eretz Israel has changed, because he says the 2 main issues with Tosfos he claims doesn't apply. Number one is, even without his state you might argue, but certainly with the state, that it's not a danger like it was. People fly all the time, all over the place, so it's easy to get there. And today, it's much easier now to fulfill mitzvahs hatulis ba'aretz. You have the Rabbana, you have people taking off Truma, Meiser, etc. So therefore, Rav Waldenberg seems to say it plays a special role, until that seems to be Rav Shechter's view as well. And Rav Shechter always quotes the Avnei Nezer's pshat. The Avnei Nezer asked the kasha, why does the Rambam leave out The mitzvahs, according to Rav Moshe, it's a mitzvah kiyumis and a mitzvah chiyuvis. According to Rabbi Neza, no, it's a mitzvah chiyuvis. So why is it left out? Because the Rambam tells us that you're only going to count the mitzvah once. He already counted in other mitzvahs. What other mitzvahs he counted in? The mitzvah of Hachreim Tachreim is to throw out the 7 nations who are inhabiting the land of Israel. So you throw them out. So what's the mitzvah? Throw them out and move back to New York or LA or Toronto? No, the mitzvah is to live there. So the Rambam already counted the mitzvah of Hachreim Tachreim, therefore he didn't have to list the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, but he agrees with the Ramban that it's a mitzvah minat Torah. And that's where Rav Shechter seems to go. He thinks the Ramban is the pashtus that there's a mitzvah chiyuvis to live in Eretz Yisrael. There's a whole discussion in the Rambam in Akatel Akatos. Some say the Rambam left it out like the Avnei Nezer, but it still agrees with the Ramban. Others say he left it out because there is no mitzvah. Others say it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. There's a famous Megillas Esther. That's an explanation on the Rambam. He renamed the Sefer after his mother. He claims the Rambam doesn't list the mitzvah, it only applies during biblical times and the Moshe Mashiach. And therefore, and the whole discussion, is that so simple or not? But that's the whole, and then that's the whole. The Satmar Rabbi Shita is based on a lot of things, but it's based on the Megillah Esther. So either way, the different Shitas within the Rambam, but as Rav Shechter like saying that every period in history has its own mitzvah. So he says today, with every Jew living in Eretz Yisrael, besides the mitzvah directly, it helps the state, it helps the economy, and he claims that is the mitzvah of the hour. And therefore, he thinks if one can live there, he should live there. And in fact, that seems to be the opinion of many of the Achronim, in terms of course, there are many exceptions to the rule. They quote the Gemara at the end of Ksubis, the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael. Even if you refuse to live there or go there, in theory, you are responsible for breaking up the marriage, because every Jew's home is Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, if you don't, it's assumed, unless stated to the contrary, that you want to live in Eretz Yisrael. And just as Rav Aaron Lichtenstein used to say, he still does say, that just like we would feel deprived if we didn't have Kedushas Azman, we didn't have the mitzvah of Shabbos, we didn't have the mitzvah of Yantiv, so too we should feel at the same pain living without Kedushas HaMakom. So we don't have the Beis HaMikdash today, but we have Eretz Yisrael, we have the Kol Torah Maravi, so we have an opportunity to be there, one should take advantage. And as it concludes from the Rav Diskin the Maral Diskin points out that by Eved Ivri, we know he pierces his ear. If he decides the 6 years he has to work, the 7th year he goes free. If he decides he wants to stay, he has to pierce his ear, because he had heard not to become a slave, but not to steal. So therefore we pierce the ear. So the Maral Diskin asks, if piercing the ear is a punishment, so why are we doing it now? We should have did it when it happened. Right after he stole, or if he became a slave, we should pierce his ear. Why are we doing it later? So the Maral Diskin points out, because really the Avdus, the slavery, was supposed to be the punishment. But we see he turned the slavery into a mitzvah. He turned the slavery into a good thing. Oh, it's so great here, I don't have to worry. No worries, I have my master taking care of me. So if the master isn't So if slavery isn't the only, so he never got a punishment, hence he has to pierce his ear. So too, they point out, is Rav Shakta like saying, because of our sins, we are thrown into Golus. We're thrown out of Eretz Yisrael. So now that we have Eretz Yisrael back, so therefore we don't want it to be like the Eved Ivri that doesn't appreciate Chutz La'aretz as a punishment. And therefore, especially now, during the 3 weeks, the 9 days, and Tisha B'Av time, we should think about the Mizrah Yisrael, but as well think about the Churban Habayis, and we and pray for the day when Yibana Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, and Tisha B'Av will no longer be a sad day of Churban and Avelis, but it will be a day of celebration.